Stop talking.
I'm telling you, my documents can be verified right now.
Yeah? Verified how?
Dispatch, airport ops, the airline desk, any of that.
That's not how this works.
It is if you think I'm lying about.
You got a real answer for why you're in this area?
Change. I just came from staff.
You're real comfortable for somebody I can't
you
place
can place me, you just haven't
Watch
checked.
the tone.
This isn't tone. This is me trying to keep you from making.
This officer thought he had an easy arrest in front of him. Just another traffic stop. Just another driver he could push, question, and put in cuffs without anybody important caring. He was wrong. The man he stopped was a black commercial airline captain in uniform, tied to a federal system that tracks arrests, security status, and professional conduct with no room for sloppy police work. The officer didn't understand that when he snapped those cuffs shut, he wasn't ending a stop. He was starting the collapse of his own career. Tell me where you're watching from. City, state, country. And if you watch stories about power abuse, real consequences, and people who stay calm while somebody else ruins their own future, like the video and subscribe. The pilot's name was Andre Bennett. He was 46, senior captain, and one of the most trusted pilots at his airline. Long-haul routes, clean record, no criminal history, no disciplinary record. The kind of professional who had spent years building a reputation that depended on reliability, judgment, and federal clearance. The officer was Ryan Cole, Patrol Division, airport corridor assignment that night. He had a record inside the department too, but not the kind posted on plaques. Complaints, arguments during stops, reports that sounded stronger on paper than they did on video. Supervisors had let it slide for years because he produced arrests and liked acting confident. The stop happened on a road near the employee access route to the airport. Andre had just left a secured staff area and was heading toward the terminal side for a schedule change. He was still in full uniform. Pilot shirt, stripes, tie, airline ID clipped to his chest, flight bag in the back seat. Cole stopped him anyway. At first it sounded like a routine traffic excuse. Lane position, slow roll, something minor. Then the reason shifted. Cole started asking why Andre was in the area. Then he focused on the ID, then on Andre's tone. That usually tells the whole story. When the explanation keeps changing, the stop isn't about the explanation. Andre handed over his license, registration, and airline credentials. He answered directly. He explained he was an active airline captain and told Cole the information could be verified quickly. Cole didn't verify it. He kept pressing, asked more questions than the stop required, treated Andre like he was inventing his job on the spot. The body cam would later show something simple and ugly. The officer had visible identification in his hand and still chose confrontation. Andre stayed measured. That's important here. He didn't give Cole the scene Cole seemed to want. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue in circles. He kept bringing it back to facts. He told Cole the stop could be cleared up through dispatch or airport operations. He also warned him that an arrest would create serious problems because active pilots are subject to reporting rules and security review. That should have ended it. A competent officer checks the credentials, confirms identity, and moves on. Cole went the other way. He started treating Andre's explanation like a challenge. Not because the facts were unclear, because he didn't like being corrected. Some officers hear a calm answer from a black professional and decide it's attitude. That's what happened here. He called for backup. The radio traffic made it worse. Cole described the stop in a way that raised the temperature. Not a cooperative driver with credentials ready for verification. Not a uniformed pilot trying to explain the consequences of a false arrest. He framed it like he had a problem subject trying to use status to avoid police authority, and that's how a bad stop becomes a dangerous one. One officer's ego gets broadcast as the official version before anybody else arrives. Andre kept telling him the same thing. Verify the ID, contact the airline desk, check airport records. He made it clear Cole was about to make a mistake with real consequences. Cole responded with force. He ordered Andre out of the car, put hands on him, ignored the credentials already provided, ignored the setting, ignored the fact that he was standing near an airport operations zone with cameras, logs, access records, and other people who knew exactly what a pilot uniform looked like. Then he cuffed him. That was the moment the stop stopped being defensible. Backup reached the scene after Andre was already restrained. One of the officers reportedly looked from the cuffs to the uniform to the ID and understood right away this wasn't adding up. Cole stayed committed. Officers like him usually do. Once they cross the line, they think backing off will make them look weak. So they keep going and hope the paperwork saves them later. It didn't save him. Andre was searched on the roadside in full uniform. People saw it. Airport workers passed by. A shuttle driver slowed down. Someone filmed part of it from another vehicle. More damaging than any bystander video, though, was the footage from the officers themselves. Bodycam, dashcam, dispatch timestamps, location data. Everything was being preserved, while Cole kept acting like he controlled the story. He didn't. A supervisor started asking questions over the radio. Dispatch was already checking the identification details. Airport operations had become aware that a uniformed airline captain had been detained near the terminal access route. That changed the risk immediately. Once an active pilot is arrested, even falsely, the issue can move into airline compliance, security review, and licensing consequences fast. Andre knew that. That's why he warned Cole early. Cole either didn't understand it or didn't care. The problem for him was simple. The arrest happened before basic verification. That's hard to explain away. Harder when the person in cuffs had valid credentials on him. Harder still when the footage shows he was calm and specific the whole time. By the time transport was being discussed, the scene had already started shifting against the officer. The questions were getting sharper, the timeline was getting cleaner, and the first people reviewing the logs were seeing the same thing the camera would later show. This did not look like good police work, it looked personal. Cole still thought he was handling a roadside arrest. He wasn't. He had just put a federally cleared airline captain into handcuffs without doing the one thing that could have prevented the entire disaster. And once that arrest entered the system, it was going to reach people his badge couldn't impress. At the station, Officer Ryan Cole still acted like the arrest had solved the problem. He thought the stop was over and the paperwork would protect him. Captain Andre Bennett knew better. The arrest itself was now the problem. For most people, a false arrest is already serious. For an active commercial pilot, it can spread into other systems fast. Airline review, security review, record checks, questions about access and reporting. Andre understood that the second the cuffs went on, he asked for a lawyer. His attorney was Monica Hale, a lawyer who handled aviation employment issues and civil rights cases. She moved quickly and kept it narrow. Preserve the evidence, lock down the timeline, notify the airline, document the professional damage. That was enough to change the tone inside the department. Hale sent notice demanding preservation of body camera video, dash camera video, booking records, dispatch audio, supervisor communications, and every record tied to credential checks. No room for missing files later, no room for edited memory. She also contacted Andre's airline. The airline had to take it seriously. Andre was not just an employee with a complaint. He was a senior captain with an arrest now attached to his name. That meant compliance staff had to review what happened, when it happened, and whether the arrest created any issue for his work status or security profile. That review started immediately. The result was bad for Cole. Andre had been exactly where he said he was supposed to be. His credentials were active. His schedule matched his explanation. His access history matched his route. The officer had not arrested a mystery driver. He had arrested an easy person to verify and skipped the verification step. That fact hurt the department from the start. Inside the station, supervisors began asking the questions Cole did not want to answer. Why did he move to handcuffs before confirming identity? Why did he describe the stop over radio like a resistance problem? Why did he ignore visible airline credentials? Why was a uniformed captain processed instead of checked and released? Cole tried to lean on discretion, then on suspicious behavior, then on attitude. None of it helped. The evidence trail was getting cleaner, not messier. Video showed Andre calm. The timeline showed verification was possible early. The setting made the mistake worse, because this happened near airport operations, where records exist for almost everything. Then Monica Hale widened the pressure. She notified the Federal Aviation Administration that a credentialed commercial pilot had been taken into custody after presenting valid identification during a stop near airport operations. She was not asking the Federal Aviation Administration to run the police department. She was putting the incident into the Federal Aviation record because false arrest information involving an active pilot can affect regulated security and employment systems. That got attention. The Federal Aviation Administration was not focused on local police discipline. It was focused on aviation system integrity. A bad arrest can create bad data. Bad data tied to a pilot can affect security review, access questions, and professional standing. That made the case bigger than Cole understood. Once that notice went out, the department had a new problem. This was no longer just a complaint about one traffic stop. It was now a case with federal visibility and a clear professional damage trail. That changed the internal calculation. Command staff stopped thinking only about defending an arrest. They started thinking about exposure, civil liability, record integrity, oversight failure, damage to the city if the video matched the legal claim. Then another issue surfaced. People inside the department pulled Cole's complaint history. What they found was not one shocking incident. It was a pattern. Prior stops, prior accusations of escalation, prior complaints saying he treated routine encounters like dominance contests. Local leadership had ignored those warnings before. That got much harder to justify now. Andre was released, but that did not fix anything. The arrest record had already been created. The airline had already been notified. His legal team had already moved. The Federal Aviation Administration had already been alerted. The department had already lost the chance to quietly call it a misunderstanding. Cole still seemed to think this was a report writing problem. It was not. It was becoming an evidence problem, a civil rights problem, and a career-ending problem. By the end of those first days, the department knew something simple. Officer Ryan Cole had arrested a senior commercial pilot before checking credentials that could have cleared the stop in minutes. That decision was now being examined by lawyers, airline compliance staff, and federal aviation officials. That is where the pressure stopped moving outward and started turning back on him. Once the Federal Aviation Administration was notified, the case stopped being something the department could smooth over with a better report. Internal Affairs opened a formal review. That changed everything. Up to that point, Ryan Cole had been treating the case like a dispute over judgment. Internal Affairs looked at it differently. They looked at sequence, timing, what he knew, when he knew it, and what he ignored before using force. That is where his version started falling apart. The video showed Captain Andre Bennett giving identification early. The dispatch timeline showed verification could have been done before the handcuffs. The radio traffic showed Cole raising the tone of the stop before backup even arrived. That matters. Once an officer frames a driver as a problem over the radio, other officers arrive expecting confrontation. Internal Affairs focused on that fast. Then they compared Cole's written report to the actual footage. That was worse. His wording made the stop sound unstable. The footage showed Andre controlled and direct. His report suggested uncertainty about identity. The video showed visible airline credentials and a clear explanation. He described conduct as suspicious that looked ordinary on camera. That kind of gap is dangerous for an officer. Bad judgment can sometimes survive internal review. A report that stretches facts usually doesn't. Then the department found what local leadership had ignored for too long. Old complaints, not one complaint, several. Different drivers. Similar pattern. Routine stop. Sudden escalation. Strong language in the report, thin support on video, claims that people became uncooperative when the actual issue was that Cole did not like being questioned. Some of the prior complainants were professionals too. A hospital administrator, a city contractor, a military reservist. The details changed. The pattern did not. That turned this from one bad arrest into a leadership problem. Internal Affairs started asking why those complaints had not triggered stronger review earlier, why supervisors kept signing off on his conduct, why body camera footage in older cases had not led to retraining or discipline. That is when command staff realized the case was no longer just about Cole. It was about the people who kept protecting him. Andre's legal team understood that immediately. Monica Hale pushed for the complaint history, prior stop records, use of force review, and any internal findings tied to profiling allegations. She was building the argument that the arrest was not random. It was the result of a known pattern the department failed to address. That argument had force behind it. The Federal Aviation Administration did not run the internal affairs case, but the federal attention increased the pressure. The department knew outside agencies were now aware that one of its officers had arrested an active commercial pilot after ignoring valid credentials. That made delay harder. So did the airline records. Andre's airline confirmed his status again. Active captain. Valid credentials. Work-related presence near the airport. No confusion there. No gray area. Now Internal Affairs had a clean timeline. Cole had a uniformed airline captain in front of him. He was given identification. He had ways to verify it. He chose escalation first. That sequence is brutal in an administrative case because it removes the usual escape routes. He could not say the pilot hid his identity. He could not say verification was impossible. He could not say the situation forced immediate arrest. The record did not support any of that. The review then moved into profiling. That word carries weight, but Internal Affairs did not need to start with a slogan. They had facts. A black pilot in full uniform. A stop that shifted reasons. A refusal to accept credentials. A decision to interpret calm explanation as defiance. Prior complaints showing the same approach with other black drivers and other professionals. Piece by piece, the motive became easier to see. Cole had not treated Andre like a threat because the facts supported that. He had treated him like a man who did not fit the role Cole wanted him in. When Andre stayed calm, stayed precise, and did not fold, Cole escalated. That was the center of the case. The department tried for a short time to contain the damage. Supervisors talked about policy review, about waiting for all facts, about standard process. That language did not last long. Too much evidence was already locked in. Too many records matched Andre's account. Then one more problem hit. A review of stop data showed Cole had a higher rate of discretionary escalation in encounters with black drivers than with others in the same assignment area. Numbers alone do not prove everything, but in this case, they matched the videos, the complaints, and the arrest. That made the defense weaker. By then, Cole was no longer being treated as the officer who made a hard call under pressure. He was being treated as the department's liability. That is a cold shift. It happens quietly. First, command stops defending you in meetings. Then lawyers stop shaping language around your good faith. Then union protection becomes procedural instead of personal. People start preparing for separation, not rescue. Andre, on the other side, was still dealing with the real damage. His name had gone through arrest records. His employer had to review the incident. He had to document everything to protect his career. He was not sitting back enjoying the reversal. He was doing what wrongfully arrested professionals always have to do, cleaning up harm they did not create. The difference now was that the evidence was finally forcing the institution to confront what happened. Ryan Cole had turned a basic stop into a false arrest because he wanted control more than he wanted facts. The cameras caught it. The records proved it. His past complaints made it harder to deny. Federal aviation attention made it impossible to bury. By the end of the internal affairs phase, one thing was clear. This was not heading toward a quiet suspension. It was heading toward collapse. The disciplinary phase moved fast once internal affairs finished the review. By then, the department was no longer arguing over whether Officer Ryan Cole had made a difficult call. The record showed he had ignored valid identification, skipped verification, escalated the stop, and arrested Captain Andre Bennett without a solid legal basis. The video did not help him. The dispatch record did not help him. His own complaint history made it worse. At the hearing, Cole tried the same defense he had used from the beginning. He said he relied on his training. He said he had concerns about identity. He said he acted within officer discretion. That defense collapsed under the timeline. The panel had the body camera footage. They had the radio traffic. They had the booking sequence. They had the airline records confirming Andre's status. They had the airport access records. They had the evidence showing that verification could have happened before the arrest. That was the key point. Cole did not make a mistake after trying every reasonable step. He skipped the reasonable step and went straight to force. That is hard to defend in any case. It was fatal here. Internal leadership also had to face its own role. Complaints against Cole had been sitting in the system for years. Not hidden completely, just minimized, reframed, treated as isolated. Once this arrest brought outside attention, that old habit became part of the scandal. The department had not only failed to stop one bad arrest, it had failed to act on warnings before the arrest happened. Cole was terminated. That alone would have ended many careers. It did not end his problems. The case was then referred for a review of his peace officer certification. That process looked at honesty, judgment, misuse of authority, and conduct incompatible with law enforcement work. Cole had problems in every category. The gap between his report and the video hurt him badly. So did the finding that he escalated before basic verification. When the review ended, his certification was revoked. That meant he was not just fired from one department. He was effectively shut out of law enforcement work. That was the professional end of Ryan Cole. Andre Bennett's side moved on a different track. His lawyers pursued the civil case using the same facts that destroyed Cole inside the department: wrongful arrest, civil rights violation, damage to professional standing, emotional distress, career risk created by unlawful police action. The city had little room to fight. The evidence was already fixed. The federal aviation issue made the consequences easier to explain. Andre was not claiming vague harm. He had a real profession, real reporting exposure, real reputational risk, and a documented arrest that should never have happened. The city paid. The settlement was large enough to get attention inside the department and at City Hall. Not because money fixes what happened. It doesn't. But large settlements force institutions to admit cost in a language they understand. Andre had been put in handcuffs on a roadside near the airport while wearing the uniform he had spent years earning. Then he had to protect his name from the fallout of somebody else's ego. The payment reflected that. Andre also got something more important than the money. He kept his career. The airline review cleared him. The record showed the arrest had no legitimate basis. His status was protected. He returned to flying. Same profession, same command seat, same federal trust that Cole had tried to drag through the mud in a matter of minutes. That contrast says everything. Andre went back to the skies. Cole lost his badge, his certification, and his future in the field he thought gave him untouchable power. The department then had to make changes it should have made earlier. Supervisors were required to review profiling complaints with more detail instead of dismissing them as attitude disputes. Stops involving professional credentials near airport operations got stricter verification rules. Body camera review expanded. Escalation patterns were tracked more closely. Training was updated to address profiling, discretionary stops, and the risk of treating calm explanation as defiance. None of that happened because leadership suddenly became wise. It happened because the department got embarrassed, exposed, and hit financially. That is usually how change works in cases like this. Not from speeches, from consequences. The larger lesson was clear. Profiling a black professional in uniform does not become less serious because the officer writes a strong report. It becomes more serious when the evidence shows the report was used to cover ego, bad judgment, and abuse of authority. Andre Bennett understood the system better than the officer arresting him. He stayed calm, stayed factual, and kept warning him to stop. Ryan Cole heard that as disrespect. That choice cost him everything. And that is why accountability matters at the top, not just on paper. If leadership ignores patterns, bad officers get bolder. If departments protect weak conduct, somebody eventually gets hurt, and the whole institution pays. In this case, the officer picked the wrong man, in the wrong place, under the wrong set of rules, and every shortcut he took came back on him. What would you have done in Andre Bennett's position? Have you ever seen somebody in authority make a bad situation worse because they could not stand being corrected? Put it in the comments. Share this story with somebody who still thinks abuse of power only matters when it turns violent. And subscribe if you want more real stories about profiling, accountability, and the moment arrogance finally meets consequences.
One shooter's down. There may be a second.
He stopped them! That's the guy who saved people!
Shut up! Back up! North corridor, dark hoodie, ball cap. Moving against evac. Check cameras.
I'm resisting!
You're pinning the wrong man while you ignore the only lead you've got.
Don't grab my file scrape! I'm complying!
This is why you need to know your rights. When police rushed into that mall after the shooting stopped, they should have secured the scene, checked the threat, and listened to witnesses. Instead, one officer picked the wrong man, forced him to the ground, and turned a life-saving intervention into a constitutional violation. Stay with this one because the moment he realized who he had in cuffs, his authority started falling apart in real time. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you follow stories about rights, accountability, and people keeping control while everyone else loses theirs, like the video and subscribe. Officer Tyler Grayson entered the east corridor of Ridgeway Mall a few minutes after the first shots had sent people running. The worst part of the attack was already over by then. The gunman was down near the food court entrance. Shoppers were hiding behind planters, kiosks, and flipped tables. Some were crying. Some were calling family, some were recording. Store alarms were going off. A stroller sat on its side near a pretzel stand. The scene was loud, confused, and dangerous. But the shooter had already been stopped. The man who stopped him was Marcus Hale. Marcus wasn't acting wild. He wasn't holding people at gunpoint. He wasn't shouting over the crowd. His weapon was holstered. He was standing a few feet from the downed attacker, watching the corridor, the exits, and the movement around him. He had already pushed civilians toward cover and away from the open line of fire. He was doing what trained people do after a threat drops. He was checking for the next problem. Witnesses were already yelling that Marcus had saved lives. Grayson ignored them. He saw a man near a body and decided that was enough. He moved straight in, closed distance fast, and tackled Marcus to the ground before getting a clear read on the scene. Several people started shouting at once. They were trying to tell him he had the wrong man. One woman screamed that Marcus had pulled her little boy behind cover. A store employee pointed at the shooter and tried to explain what happened. An older man kept saying the same thing over and over, that the man on the ground was the one who stopped it. Grayson stayed locked on Marcus. That's where he lost control of the scene. Not because he lacked information, because he refused to use it. Marcus didn't resist. He didn't swing, twist, or argue in panic. He tried to explain the situation while Grayson pinned him down. He said the shooter was already neutralized. He said there could be another involved person moving towards the north exit. He said his identification was in his back pocket. He told the officer to stop wrenching his left arm because he had recently had shoulder surgery. Grayson didn't slow down. He forced Marcus's arm higher behind his back and drove a knee into him while reaching for the cuffs. Marcus repeated the warning about the shoulder. Grayson kept going. That was one problem. The other problem was bigger. While he was busy dominating the wrong man, he wasn't following the only useful lead he had at that moment. Marcus was trying to tell him there might be a second person connected to the shooter. Grayson treated that like an excuse instead of operational information. That decision changed the scene. Marcus had come to the mall for a simple errand. He was home on temporary leave and had stopped to buy a gift for his sister before meeting family later that afternoon. He wasn't looking for trouble. According to later witness statements, the gunman entered through the food court side carrying a rifle and opened fire into a weekend crowd. Marcus moved on instinct. He pulled people out of the line of fire, used available cover, identified the attacker, and stopped him before the casualty count got worse. Then he did what mattered next. He scanned for anything connected to the first threat. That's what Grayson interrupted. Pinned on the tile, Marcus kept his voice level and kept trying to give information. He described a man moving against the flow of evacuees seconds before the shooting. Dark hoodie, ball cap, quick movement, possible eye contact with the shooter before the first round went off. Marcus wasn't claiming he had a full case built in 30 seconds. He was saying there was enough to lock down that side of the mall and check cameras immediately. Grayson answered with threats. He said Marcus was looking at felony charges. He accused him of interfering. He said he'd sort out the story later. That told everyone around him exactly what kind of officer he was in that moment. He wasn't trying to understand what happened. He was trying to win the encounter. More officers arrived and took their cue from him. That made things worse. One officer moved to help secure Marcus instead of checking the area around the downed shooter. Another started pushing witnesses back without taking real statements. A third looked uncertain for a second when Marcus repeated the warning about another possible subject. But Grayson kept control of the contact and pushed forward like nothing around him mattered. This is how bad police work spreads. One wrong assumption, then other people start working inside it. Marcus stayed controlled. He repeated that his weapon was holstered. He repeated that witnesses could confirm what happened. He repeated that his ID was in his pocket. He repeated that the North Corridor needed attention. He gave the officer every chance to correct the mistake early. Grayson didn't take it. Instead, he started searching Marcus more aggressively. He went through his pockets without listening and without any sign that he understood the legal or tactical mess he was creating. Phones were pointed at him from 3 directions now. People were filming. The crowd wasn't confused anymore. They could see exactly what was happening. A man who had stopped a shooter was being treated like the threat, while the officer ignored everyone telling him otherwise. Then Grayson pulled out Marcus's wallet. Inside was a credential holder that didn't match the picture Grayson had built in his head. It wasn't just a driver's license and a carry permit. There was military identification, base access documentation. Then there was one more credential, specialized official, the kind of thing that should have made him stop and reassess immediately. He hesitated, not long enough. He looked at it, then kept trying to control the scene like he hadn't just found proof that the man under him was not who he had assumed. That hesitation was the first visible crack. He still didn't want to admit he had made a serious mistake. He was standing on authority, and he wasn't ready to let go of it. Then Sergeant Elena Ruiz arrived. Ruiz had enough experience to read a scene quickly. She saw the downed shooter. She saw the witness reactions. She saw Marcus cuffed on the floor. She saw Grayson holding credentials with a look that told her he was already in deeper than he understood. She took the wallet from his hand, looked through it once. Then she looked at Marcus and recognized the name. Not because Marcus was famous, because she had seen it before in interagency training and emergency coordination briefings. She knew exactly what kind of operator he was dealing with. She also knew that if he was calm, compliant, and giving live threat information, then Grayson had likely just made one of the worst decisions of his career. Ruiz ordered the cuffs off immediately. Grayson started explaining. He said he had to secure the armed subject first. He said he was following protocol. He said he couldn't take chances. Ruiz wasn't buying it. The facts in front of her were too clear. Marcus had complied. Witnesses had identified him. His weapon had been holstered. He had been trying to provide tactical information. Grayson had ignored all of it. Once the cuffs came off, Marcus got to his feet carefully and checked his left shoulder. One of the other officers moved towards the north corridor at last. Another started separating witnesses for statements. Ruiz asked Marcus for the threat picture. He gave it to her without attitude and without speech-making. He explained that the shooter had shown signs of coordination before the attack. He described the possible second person again. He explained the movement, the timing, and why the exit route needed immediate review. He made clear he wasn't speculating for attention. He was telling them what he had seen while stopping the gunman. Then he made the point that hit hardest. He told Ruiz that Grayson hadn't just detained the wrong man. He had interrupted the one person on scene who was actively tracking the rest of the threat. That changed the tone around everyone standing there. Now, the issue wasn't just a bad detention. It was operational failure during an active shooter response. Witnesses had seen it. Bodycam had captured it. Civilian phones had captured it. Mall cameras had captured it. There was no clean way to explain it away. Ruiz immediately split the response the way it should have been split from the beginning. Officers were sent to check the north side exits and pull surveillance. Witnesses were held for proper interviews. The area around the shooter was resecured. EEMS was directed toward injured civilians and towards Marcus's shoulder. Command staff started getting updated information that actually matched the scene. Grayson had gone quiet by then. The confidence was gone. The threats were gone. He looked like a man realizing that every wrong choice he had made was now attached to video, reports, witnesses, and a chain of command much bigger than his own department. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to humiliate him. He just told Ruiz he would fully cooperate and that the footage would show everything. That was enough. Because once a case like this leaves the heat of the moment and moves into review, the loud officer usually has the weakest position. And Grayson had just handed reviewers everything they needed. Once supervisors reviewed the body cam, the issue changed fast. This was no longer just a bad scene decision. It was a force complaint, a rights violation, and a response failure caught from multiple angles. Marcus gave a statement that evening. He kept it simple. He explained where he was, how he stopped the shooter, what he saw before the attack, and what he told Officer Grayson while he was on the ground. He also documented the shoulder injury, recent surgery, clear warning given, force still used. The witnesses backed him up. The mother with the stroller said Marcus pulled her child to cover. The store employee said Marcus was scanning exits, not threatening anyone, when police arrived. The off-duty nurse said Marcus kept trying to warn Grayson about another possible subject. A teenage worker said the same thing. On video, the crowd could be heard telling Grayson he had the wrong man. That hurt Grayson immediately. He couldn't claim he had no information. He had plenty. He ignored it. Mall surveillance made it worse. Investigators pulled footage from the food court and north exit. It showed a man matching Marcus's description, moving away during the panic after what looked like brief pre-attack coordination with the shooter. That didn't prove a full second shooter yet, but it proved Marcus had given a real lead. Grayson had chosen not to act on it. Internal Affairs opened a case within hours. The complaint list was already serious. Excessive force, improper detention, questionable search, failure to assess the scene, failure to follow live threat information. Once military command was notified, local leadership lost control of the pace. Marcus was active duty Navy SEAL. That brought outside attention fast. NCIS made contact. City Legal got involved. Command staff understood the problem right away. One officer had detained the man who stopped the shooter and ignored the only useful tactical warning available at the time. Grayson tried to defend himself in his first interview. He said he had to secure an armed subject in a chaotic environment. That sounded better on paper than it looked on video. The footage showed a compliant man, a holstered weapon, witnesses yelling the truth, and repeated warnings being ignored. Then investigators checked Grayson's history. That opened another problem. He already had prior complaints tied to aggressive stops and force issues. None had ended his career before. Now they looked different. Instead of isolated incidents, they looked like a pattern. Quick escalation, poor judgment, need for control, weak reassessment once facts changed. That pattern mattered. The department first moved him off the street, then put him on leave. By then, the videos were already spreading. People understood the story fast. A man stopped a shooter. The first officer treated him like the suspect. Witnesses tried to correct it. The officer kept going. Then the truth came out. Marcus stayed quiet in public. Through counsel, he gave one controlled statement. He said he acted to protect civilians, attempted to assist responding officers, and was then subjected to unnecessary force and unlawful detention while providing threat information. That statement carried weight because the evidence matched it. Reviewers also focused on the shoulder injury. Medical records supported Marcus. The warning was on camera. Grayson had no good answer for that. The search became another issue. Marcus was compliant. He was identifying himself. Witnesses were confirming his role. Grayson was not working from a stable arrest with clear facts. He was digging deeper into a detention that was already going bad. Sergeant Ruiz also became important in the review. Her actions showed the scene could have been handled correctly. She arrived, read the situation, recognized the mistake, removed the cuffs, and redirected officers to the threat lead Marcus had raised. That made it harder for anyone to argue Grayson's conduct was unavoidable. It wasn't. By the end of the week, the department knew this case was heading toward discipline, public fallout, and a lawsuit. Federal attention was close. Marcus's lawyers were preparing. Grayson's record was under full review. The city was already calculating damage. And the worst part for Grayson still hadn't arrived. That came when the final findings landed. His past complaints were put next to this incident, and the department had to decide whether it would keep defending him or cut him loose. Internal Affairs finished its review with too much evidence stacked in one direction. Bodycam, mall video, witness statements, medical records, supervisor review, Ruiz's report, Marcus's statement. They all said the same thing. Grayson misread the scene, used unnecessary force, ignored clear witness information, ignored a medical warning, and disrupted the response by focusing on the wrong man. The department fired him, not quietly either. The official language was cleaner than the reality, but the result was clear. He was terminated for misconduct tied to use of force, failure to follow response standards, and conduct that exposed the department to major legal liability. Then the civil case hit. Marcus filed suit over unlawful detention, excessive force, and violation of his constitutional rights. His lawyers didn't need to build some dramatic theory. The footage did most of the work. He was compliant. His weapon was holstered. Witnesses were identifying him in real time. He was giving useful tactical information. Grayson ignored all of it and treated control like the mission. The city settled. That part usually tells you everything. Cities fight cases they think they can survive. They settle fast when the facts are toxic. Marcus received compensation for the shoulder injury, the unlawful detention, and the broader rights violations. The settlement also required policy review and updated training. The second subject lead stayed under investigation for months. Authorities never publicly claimed more than they could prove, but the review confirmed Marcus had raised a credible lead that should have been acted on immediately. That finding mattered because it locked in the bigger point. Grayson's conduct was not just bad policing, it interfered with a live emergency response. That became the lesson no one in the department could avoid. Training changed after that. Officers were retrained on active shooter arrival priorities, witness intake under stress, lawful handling of armed Good Samaritans, and the need to update decisions when facts change. Supervisors were also pushed harder on early warning review because Grayson's old complaints looked very different once they were placed next to this case. What had been treated as isolated attitude problems now looked like obvious warning signs. That embarrassed command staff too, because this wasn't just one reckless officer. It was also a department that had seen smaller versions of the same behavior and failed to stop it early. Once federal attention and public pressure hit, that record became impossible to hide behind paperwork. Sergeant Ruiz came out of it with more credibility. Her actions didn't erase the damage, but they showed the scene could still be corrected once someone competent took over. That mattered in the final review. Marcus went back to duty after medical clearance. He didn't turn himself into a media figure. He didn't chase interviews. He made one clear statement and left it there. He said the shooter was not the only danger that day. The other danger was a responder who cared more about control than facts. That line stuck because it was true, and that's the whole point of the story. During emergencies, the badge means nothing without discipline. Panic plus ego is a threat by itself. A lawful armed citizen, a veteran, even an active operator, can still get treated like the enemy when the wrong officer shows up and stops thinking. Rights matter most in that moment, not after. What would you have done in that situation? Have you ever seen someone in authority make everything worse because they refuse to listen? Put it in the comments. Share the story with someone who still thinks bad policing is just a paperwork issue. And subscribe for more stories like this.
Step away from the pump.
I'm telling you, this is official work.
Yeah, official for who?
Law enforcement. You need to slow down and verify before you touch anything here.
No, you need to explain why you pumping stolen fuel.
Stolen fuel? You haven't even checked
Don't
anything.
tell me what I checked.
Then check it.
ID, right
I
now.
already told you who I am. Call the supervisor and verify.
This is why you never let a badge replace facts. When a patrol officer rolled up on a black man at a gas station and accused him of stealing fuel, he expected fear, excuses, and quick compliance. What he got instead was a calm federal investigator in the middle of a sanctioned operation. And the second that truth came out, the officer knew he had pushed the wrong man in the worst possible place. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you follow stories about profiling, abuse of power, and real accountability, like the video and subscribe. This started in the middle of a working investigation, not in the middle of some random misunderstanding. The man at the pump was Adrian Cole. He was a federal investigator, mid-40s, plainclothes, unmarked vehicle, active field assignment. He was tracking a fuel fraud case tied to stolen commercial card data and coordinated purchases across state lines. He wasn't there for gas on the way home. He was watching a target, logging movements, and waiting for the next step in the operation. The officer who turned it into a public scene was Tyler Boone, a city patrol cop who had a habit of acting first and sorting out facts later. He came into that station already convinced he was about to catch somebody. That confidence lasted right up until he understood who Adrian really was. The gas station sat near an interstate exit in a busy retail strip. Early evening, bright canopy lights, cars coming in and out, security cameras over the pumps in the storefront, a cashier inside, a few customers close enough to hear the officer's voice the moment he got loud. Boone spotted Adrian near the pump and locked onto him fast. He looked at the plainclothes, looked at the vehicle, saw a black man standing there, and decided he had a theft case before he asked a single useful question. He didn't start by checking the plate. He didn't ask station staff what was going on. He didn't approach like somebody trying to understand a situation. He walked in like he'd already written the report in his head. He got out of his cruiser and started giving commands right away. He accused Adrian of pumping stolen fuel. He demanded identification. He ordered him to keep his hands visible and stop moving. His tone wasn't controlled. It was aggressive from the start, the kind officers use when they want to dominate a scene before anyone can challenge them. Adrian didn't match that energy. He stayed steady. He kept his movements limited. He told Boone he was law enforcement and that the officer needed to verify before interfering any further. That should have slowed things down. It didn't. Boone took that response as defiance. He stepped closer and repeated the accusation like volume could make it true. He talked over Adrian. He acted like the issue was settled and all that remained was getting the suspect into cuffs. That was the first clear sign he cared more about control than procedure. Adrian tried again. He told Boone in a measured way that this was official work and that a supervisor needed to be contacted before Boone touched anything tied to the scene. He wasn't trying to win an argument. He was trying to stop a patrol officer from damaging an active operation. Boone pushed harder. He moved into Adrian's space and started using physical presence, the way some officers do when they think size and pressure will get them what facts haven't. He positioned himself between Adrian and the vehicle. He kept talking about theft. He started warning him about detention. He made it sound like force was the next step if Adrian didn't comply exactly the way Boone wanted. The problem for Boone was simple. Adrian didn't look like a thief trying to escape. He looked like a professional trying to keep a reckless officer from making a bigger mistake. Anyone who took 2 seconds to read the scene could see it. A customer near the next row of pumps raised a phone and started recording. Another followed. The cashier inside stopped pretending to be busy and watched through the glass. Boone either didn't notice or thought none of it would matter later. It mattered. Because once the scene was on camera, every bad decision had a timestamp. Boone still hadn't verified who Adrian was. He still hadn't called in the plate. He still hadn't checked whether another agency was working nearby. He just kept pressing the accusation. That wasn't good police work. That was ego mixed with profiling, and it was getting more obvious by the second. Adrian kept his voice level. He said enough to make clear that Boone was heading into territory he did not understand. He did not argue for the crowd. He did not start a shouting match. He gave the officer chances to back up and do this correctly. Boone didn't take them. A second patrol unit pulled in. The backup officer got out slower and read the situation better right away. He saw Adrian's posture. He saw Boone's aggression. He saw the phones out. He looked like he already understood the stop was going bad. Boone kept driving it in the wrong direction. He started talking about handcuffs, like he was already committed to making an arrest. That was the point where this stopped looking like a heated misunderstanding and started looking like liability. An officer had moved from accusation to threatened force without taking the basic steps to confirm identity. He had built the whole encounter on assumption. Adrian knew exactly what kind of officer he was dealing with by then. Not the careful kind. Not the disciplined kind. Boone was one of those patrol cops who treated being questioned as disrespect and treated calm behavior like a challenge to his authority. Then Boone noticed a document pouch Adrian had kept close to his side. That caught his attention immediately. He started focusing on it. Adrian shifted slightly to keep Boone from grabbing it, and Boone reacted like that movement proved criminal intent. He closed distance again, escalated his commands, and reached toward Adrian's arm as if he was about to force the issue. That was the moment this whole thing crossed from bad judgment into serious misconduct. Because Boone still believed he was handling a suspected thief at a gas pump. He had no idea he was about to put hands on a federal investigator in the middle of a sanctioned operation. And once that next second arrived, his whole attitude was going to collapse. Boone's hand had barely moved before Adrian stopped him with a clear warning and a tone that finally cut through the officer's noise. Adrian told him not to touch the pouch, not to touch the vehicle, and not to interfere with federal property. He said it like a man who knew exactly where the line was and knew Boone had already stepped too close to it. Boone didn't process the warning the way a careful officer would have. He heard the word federal and treated it like a bluff. That's what made this so bad. He'd built the whole encounter around his own first impression, and by now he was too deep into it to admit he might have been wrong. So instead of slowing down, he tried to overpower the situation before it slipped away from him. He told Adrian to stop talking. He said he was done with the excuses. He reached again, this time more openly. like he was going to seize the pouch and sort it out himself. Adrian moved one step back and brought the pouch forward just enough to control it, not enough to look combative. Then he opened it. That changed everything. Inside was a federal credential wallet and a signed operation packet. Not some cheap badge, not a novelty shield, real credentials, agency seal, photo match, assignment paperwork. The kind of documents patrol officers are trained to stop and verify, not argue with in front of a crowd. Boone looked at them for a second and still tried to hold on to the stop. He said something about fake IDs and said anyone could print papers. Bad move, real bad. At that point, he wasn't investigating. He was resisting reality because reality made him look reckless. Adrian kept control of the scene better than Boone did, and that was obvious to everybody standing there. He held the credentials where Bodycam and phone cameras could catch them. He identified himself fully. He stated that he was engaged in a sanctioned operation. He told Boone to call his supervisor and verify through dispatch immediately. That second officer finally stepped in a little closer. Not enough to challenge Boone directly, but enough to show he understood the problem now. He looked at the credentials, then at Boone, and you could tell he wanted this to slow down before it got worse. Too late for that. Dispatch came over Boone's radio while he was still trying to talk over Adrian. The message wasn't loud enough for the whole station to hear every word, but it was loud enough for the important part. There was an interagency notification on file. Federal personnel were operating in the area. The location matched. Boone's face changed right there. Not all at once. First confusion. Then the quick blank look people get when they realize the story they've been telling themselves just fell apart. Then panic. Small at first, then obvious. Adrian didn't let him talk his way around it. He put the credentials back in the pouch, kept his posture steady, and told Boone he had been warned more than once to verify before escalating. He said Boone had interfered with an active operation, made a criminal accusation without confirming identity, and threatened force in a situation he did not understand. Now Boone started sounding different. The swagger dropped out of his voice. He said he was only responding to what looked suspicious. He said he was doing his job. He said Adrian could have identified himself sooner, like this had happened because the target of his aggression hadn't made it easy enough for him. That excuse died fast because everyone there had just watched Adrian do exactly that. More than once, calmly, clearly. Boone ignored it because he didn't want an answer. He wanted compliance from the person he'd already decided was guilty. Then Adrian's phone rang through the secure line clipped inside his jacket. It was his supervisor. He answered, gave his name, and put the call on speaker just long enough for the chain of command to enter the scene without ever stepping out of a vehicle. Supervisory Agent Lena Velez came on sharp and direct. She identified herself, confirmed Adrian's status, confirmed the operation, and asked for the patrol officer's name and badge number. That was the moment Boone fully understood. He was no longer managing a gas station stop. He was explaining himself to people above his pay grade, with witnesses, video, and radio traffic behind all of it. He gave his name, gave the badge number. His words came out slower now, less force, more caution. He tried one more version of the same defense, saying the situation looked like possible fuel theft, and he had to act quickly. Velez shut that down. She asked whether he had verified the vehicle before accusing Adrian. He hadn't. She asked whether he had contacted a supervisor before threatening detention of someone claiming law enforcement status. He hadn't. She asked whether he had made physical contact or attempted to seize federal documents. He started answering that one carefully, which told everyone enough. The backup officer looked like he wanted to disappear. The two customers were still recording. The cashier inside had moved closer to the glass. Boone could feel the audience now because the audience had stopped being useful to him. Adrian stayed measured. That's what made Boone look even worse. He wasn't being baited. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't trying to embarrass Boone for sport. He was documenting him in real time. Big difference. One man was trying to control himself. The other had already shown he couldn't control a routine contact. Then Velez told Boone to stop all interference, clear the scene, and wait for a supervisor, because her office would be making formal contact with the department before the hour was over. That landed. Boone nodded before catching himself and remembering she couldn't see him. Then he said he understood, quietly. Nothing like the man who had stormed in minutes earlier, acting like he owned the place. He stepped back from Adrian for the first time since this started. Really stepped back. Not tactical repositioning. Retreat. Adrian didn't chase the moment. He didn't pile on. He adjusted the pouch, checked the vehicle, and made sure nothing tied to the operation had been disturbed. Then he looked at Boone and said the part Boone was going to hear again in reports, reviews, and probably depositions. He said authority means nothing when procedure disappears. That line hit because it was true, and everybody there knew it. A field supervisor from Boone's department arrived a few minutes later and got the ugly version first. Phone video, Bodycam, dispatch confirmation, federal supervisor already involved. There was no room left for Boone to frame this as a close call or a confusing stop. The facts were too clean. The sergeant separated the officers, spoke briefly with Adrian, looked at the credentials, and his whole expression tightened. He knew what kind of paperwork was coming. He also knew this wasn't just about one bad interaction. This was a public example of an officer going aggressive before getting basic facts, and the profiling angle was impossible to ignore. Adrian gave a concise statement right there. He explained why he was at the station, how Boone approached, what warnings had been given, and exactly when Boone escalated to threats and attempted interference. He didn't need to embellish anything. The officer had done enough on his own. Boone stood off to the side trying to recover a version of himself that no longer fit the scene. He wasn't commanding anything now. He wasn't directing traffic, controlling hands, or throwing around accusations. He was just a patrol officer waiting for his supervisor to decide how much of his career he had burned in one stop. And the worst part for him was this. The whole thing had started because he saw a black man in plainclothes and trusted his own bias more than protocol. That truth was all over the footage. The fallout started before Boone even left the gas station. By the time his supervisor finished the first round of questions, the video was already moving. One customer posted a clip that showed the accusation, the threats, and the exact shift in Boone's voice after Adrian's credentials came out. Another angle showed Boone closing distance and reaching toward the document pouch after being warned to stop. That part mattered because it killed any later attempt to describe the encounter as calm or routine. Adrian went back to work that night, but the stop had already damaged the operation. Once a patrol officer creates a loud scene at an active surveillance location, the whole environment changes. People notice. Targets notice. Patterns break. The federal team had to shut down that phase early and review what had been compromised. That made Boone's mistake bigger than one bad street encounter. He hadn't just embarrassed himself. He had interfered with a live investigation. The next morning, Adrian filed a formal incident memorandum through his agency and attached everything available at that point. His own field notes, dispatch time markers, body cam preservation request, security camera request, witness information. He handled it the same way experienced investigators handle everything important. Clean timeline, no exaggeration, no emotional padding. Just facts lined up in order so nobody could hide inside confusion later. Boone's department didn't have much room to stall. The footage was public. The federal agency had already made contact. Internal Affairs opened an investigation the same week. Boone was put on administrative duty first, then moved off the street entirely, while the case was reviewed. The department tried the usual early language. They called it a concerning interaction. They said they were gathering facts. They promised a full review, standard damage control. The problem for them was that the facts were already visible, and the public could hear the officer making the wrong call in real time. Then more complaints surfaced. Not criminal cases, not huge headline scandals. Something more believable and more damaging. People from the same patrol area started describing Boone the same way. Quick to accuse, fast to escalate. Different tone depending on who he was talking to. More forceful with black drivers and pedestrians, less patient when challenged. The kind of pattern departments ignore until one video makes it impossible to keep ignoring. Internal Affairs pulled Bodycam from unrelated stops. They reviewed dispatch logs. They looked at prior complaints that had gone nowhere. That part always tells the real story. One ugly incident usually doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of a pattern someone tolerated. Adrian also moved on the civil side. He filed a civil rights claim centered on unlawful attempted detention, interference with federal duties, and discriminatory enforcement. He wasn't chasing drama. He was forcing the city to answer for what its officer had done in public with full documentation. His lawyers argued that Boone skipped basic identification steps and escalated based on appearance, not evidence. That claim got attention fast because the video backed it up better than any press release could. Boone, of course, tried to save himself. He gave a statement saying the vehicle looked suspicious, the conduct at the pump looked inconsistent, and the man involved did not immediately identify himself to his satisfaction. Weak defense. It put the problem right back on him. To his satisfaction is not a legal standard. Procedure is. Verification is. Supervisor notification is. Controlled escalation is. Boone had ignored all of that. The internal report came down hard. Investigators found that Boone made a criminal accusation before establishing basic facts, failed to verify identity through available channels, escalated to threats of force without sufficient cause, and attempted to interfere with credentials and operational materials after being told he was dealing with law enforcement. The report also flagged indicators of biased enforcement. They didn't need dramatic language. The sequence spoke for itself. He was suspended first. Then the department announced formal discipline and mandatory decertification review. His future on the job got shaky in a hurry. Once an officer is publicly tied to profiling, procedural failure, and dishonesty in judgment, every prosecutor, defense lawyer, and supervisor starts looking at him differently. That's the part some officers never think about when they're throwing their weight around in a parking lot. One bad stop can follow every case they ever touch after that. The city moved toward settlement talks on Adrian's claim before trial. Also not surprising. Cases like that get expensive, and video makes them worse. The legal risk wasn't just the stop itself. It was the department's exposure if the review showed Boone had a known pattern and stayed on the street anyway. Then came the policy changes. The department issued a revised contact protocol for disputed identity situations involving plainclothes personnel, task force work, and interagency operations. Officers now had to pause and verify through dispatch and a supervisor before escalating to detention when someone credibly claimed official status. They also expanded bias review triggers for complaints tied to stops that began with unsupported criminal assumptions. Training got updated too, but training only matters if supervisors enforce it. That's where the real lesson sat. This whole thing wasn't caused by lack of information. Boone had plenty of options. He could have checked the plate. He could have contacted dispatch before accusing. He could have asked for a supervisor when Adrian said he was law enforcement. He could have stopped reaching once he saw credentials. He chose none of that because he trusted his own ego more than the job. And that's why the scene blew up. Adrian didn't become a celebrity from it. He didn't tour TV studios or turn the stop into some performance. He kept working. He gave his statements. He let the record do its work. People in his field respected that because they know how rare it is for somebody to stay that controlled while an officer tries to bully him in public. The bigger effect landed closer to home. Officers in Boone's department now had an example nobody could laugh off. Supervisors had a case they had to reference. Community members had proof for something they'd been saying for years. And younger officers watching the story understood the point immediately. If you walk into a scene with bias and attitude, cameras will finish what your bad judgment starts. That's what this story came down to. A patrol officer saw a black man at a gas pump and thought he could force the facts to fit his first assumption. He pushed hard, got reckless, and found out too late that confidence doesn't protect you when procedure collapses. Adrian didn't beat him by getting louder. He beat him by staying disciplined, knowing the rules, and making sure the record stayed clean. That's the whole power game in situations like this. The loudest person usually thinks he's winning. Then the footage gets reviewed, the timeline gets built, and all that false authority starts looking real small. What would you have done in Adrian's position? Have you ever seen an officer go aggressive before even checking the facts? Put your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with somebody who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories like this.
I asked you a question. Who are you and what are you doing here?
We already
Federal
told you.
law enforcement official business.
Then show me something I can actually verify.
There you go.
No, that's not enough.
Call it in then.
Don't tell me how to do my job.
Nobody's telling you anything. Verify it and move on.
No, here's what's going to happen. You're going to stand up and come
not
outside.
leaving
Then
this
you're
table.
obstructing.
This is why officers need to know the limits of their authority before they start throwing it around. When a patrol cop stormed into a roadside diner and tried to throw out two men he thought were suspicious drifters, he expected instant compliance. What he got instead was a calm refusal, 2 federal badges on the table, and the exact kind of public mistake that ends careers. Watch how fast the power shifted once his ego got ahead of his training. Before this goes any further, drop where you're watching from. City, state, country, wherever. And if you like stories about power trips getting checked by facts, hit like and subscribe. This one turned ugly fast, and it stayed ugly for the officer who caused it. This started in a diner that looked too ordinary for the kind of mess that was about to happen. It was late morning, local spot, highway traffic coming through, retirees at the counter, a waitress moving fast with coffee refills, a couple of truckers in a back booth. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. The kind of place where people notice strangers, but not enough to make a scene unless someone gave them a reason. 2 men had been sitting in a booth near the front windows for a while. Plain clothes, neutral jackets, no uniforms, no marked vehicles outside. They'd ordered coffee, something small to eat, and they'd barely touched either one after that. They weren't chatting much. They weren't staring at each other. They were watching the parking lot, the road, the entrance, and the reflection off the glass. People in that business always looked like they were doing nothing right up until it mattered. Those men were Deputy U.S. Marshals, Daniel Mercer and Elena Ruiz. They weren't there to eat. They were there because a fugitive tied to a federal warrant was expected to make contact in the lot outside. The diner gave them visibility, cover, and a believable reason to stay parked in one place without drawing attention. Standard surveillance choice: quiet, efficient, low profile. That was the plan. Then somebody in the diner decided the 2 quiet strangers looked wrong. It might have been a customer, might have been somebody behind the counter. Small towns do this all the time. Somebody sees 2 people sitting too long, not smiling enough, not acting familiar enough, and suddenly the whole thing becomes suspicious. Usually that goes nowhere. Sometimes an officer rolls by, asks a question, gets a simple answer, and moves on. That's what should have happened here. Instead, Officer Tyler Kessler walked in ready to dominate the room. He didn't come in curious. He came in aggressive. That mattered. The first few seconds told the whole story. He didn't scan the room and assess. He locked onto the booth immediately. Fast steps, hand already too close to his belt. Voice turned up for the audience. He wanted the room to know he had found the problem, and he was about to solve it. Mercer looked up once and knew what kind of officer this was. Not the cautious kind. Not the kind who asked himself what he might be missing. Kessler was the kind who decided first and investigated later. Bad habit in any job. Dangerous habit in law enforcement. Kessler stopped at the booth and started demanding answers. Identification. Purpose. why they'd been sitting there, why they were watching the entrance, why the owner felt uncomfortable. He didn't ask those questions to gather facts. He asked them like he was already done listening. Mercer stayed seated. Ruiz stayed seated. Both of them kept it calm. They identified themselves as federal law enforcement engaged in official business. They told him there was no threat to the public and no need to disrupt the scene. They told him he could verify through proper channels if he needed confirmation. Clean, professional. Exactly what trained people say when they don't want to blow an active operation in front of a room full of civilians. Kessler didn't hear any of it the way it was said. He heard a challenge. That's where this went bad. Not because he was confused. Confusion can be fixed in 10 seconds. This was ego. He had walked in hot, and now he needed to prove he hadn't overplayed it. Officers like that get themselves in trouble because backing off feels worse to them than being wrong. Ruiz set her badge wallet where he could see it. Mercer did the same. Gold badges, federal credentials, not vague, not hidden, not some last-second reveal. They put the truth right in front of him and gave him a clean exit. All he had to do was pause, verify, lower his voice, and step out of the way. He didn't. He dismissed the badges almost instantly. Called them fake, or not good enough, or not relevant to what he called his scene. Different officers use different wording when they panic in public, but the move is always the same. Reject the evidence. Keep control of the moment. Don't let anybody see the doubt starting to creep in. The body camera would matter later because it caught that exact shift. You could see it. The second he realized they might actually be who they said they were, he got more forceful, not less. That's the tell. A disciplined officer slows down when uncertainty enters the picture. An insecure one speeds up. Mercer gave him another out. He repeated that verification could happen through dispatch. He explained in measured terms that they were on federal business and that removing them from the diner would interfere with an active investigation. Again, simple. Again, professional. Again, offering Kessler a chance to save face without blowing up the situation. Kessler took it personally. He started threatening obstruction. He started talking about trespass. He started acting like the diner booth was some kind of local battlefield where only his authority counted. That's what power trips look like in real time. They stop being about safety. They become emotional. The officer wants obedience more than accuracy, and the room felt it. Boom. The waitress stopped moving as fast. One of the truckers turned fully around in his seat. The owner looked nervous now, not because of the marshals, but because the officer had turned a manageable question into a public confrontation. A customer near the register started recording without making a show of it. Smart move. People have learned. When an officer comes in too loud and too certain, records matter. Mercer and Ruiz still didn't match his energy. That's another thing that made Kessler look worse. He was the only person escalating. The only person making it bigger. The only person refusing a normal off-ramp. He ordered them to stand up. They refused, not dramatically, not physically. They simply held position and repeated that they were engaged in official federal work and that his demand was improper. That kind of refusal hits an officer like Kessler harder than shouting ever could. He wanted a scene he could win. What he got was calm resistance backed by law, policy, and credentials he was too arrogant to verify. Then he made the mistake that changed the whole case. He radioed for backup and framed the situation like he was dealing with two non-compliant, suspicious subjects, possibly impersonating law enforcement. That was reckless for a few reasons. First, it contaminated the response. Now, other officers were arriving with the wrong story in their heads. Second, it raised the stakes in a room full of civilians, while a federal surveillance operation was still active. Third, it created a recorded trail, dispatch logs, body cam, radio traffic, timestamps. Every bad decision now had a timestamp attached to it. Once that happens, cleanup gets hard. Ruiz tried one more time to stop the train before it hit the wall. She told him he was interfering with a marshal's operation. She told him he needed a supervisor before he made this worse. That wasn't a bluff. That was the last warning. Kessler didn't take it as a warning. He took it as disrespect. That was the moment his mask came off. He started talking like one of those officers who confuses a badge with ownership, like the town belonged to him, like jurisdiction was whatever he said it was. Like procedure only mattered when it protected his authority, not when it limited it. This happens more than departments like to admit. Training teaches one thing, ego teaches another. On a bad day, ego wins. And here's what made it even dumber. Mercer and Ruiz weren't trying to embarrass him. Not yet. They were trying to get through the assignment. They had no reason to flex, no reason to posture. The whole point of plainclothes surveillance is to stay invisible. Kessler forced the issue because he couldn't stand the idea that two quiet people at a diner didn't instantly answer to him. By the time the first backup unit pulled into the lot, the atmosphere inside had changed completely. Now it wasn't just a local officer bothering two strangers. Now it was a documented local federal confrontation inside a public business, with witnesses, video, radio traffic, and an officer who had already ignored visible credentials and doubled down anyway. That's when the real danger started. Because once more uniforms walked in, this could either get corrected immediately or become a career-ending disaster. And the person who decided that wasn't going to be Kessler anymore. It was going to be his supervisor. When Sergeant Monica Hale entered the diner, the scene was already bad for Kessler. He had two plainclothes marshals still seated, backup arriving on a false frame, civilians watching, and Bodycam recording everything. He had already ignored credentials and refused verification. That was the real problem, not the first approach. The refusal to correct it. Hale saw it fast. Kessler started talking first. He said the two men were suspicious, non-compliant, and possibly impersonating law enforcement. Haley let him get enough out to understand his position, then shifted to Mercer and Ruiz. They identified themselves again. Same calm, same facts. Federal law enforcement, active official business. Verification available immediately. Hale asked for credentials. Mercer handed them over. Ruiz did the same. Hale checked them and asked a few direct questions tied to assignment and chain. Both answered cleanly, no hesitation, no inconsistency. That ended the issue right there. The credentials were real. The officers were real. Kessler had been wrong. The smart move for him then would have been silence. He didn't take it. He kept arguing. He kept trying to justify the stop and the removal order. That made it worse. A mistaken approach can sometimes be explained. Refusing to back off after confirmation is much harder to defend. Hale shut that down immediately. She told him to step back. Then she told him to stop talking. That was the shift. A few minutes earlier, Kessler had been giving orders to everyone in the diner. Now his own supervisor was controlling him in front of backup, witnesses, and the marshals he had tried to throw out. Hale returned the credentials and gave a brief apology. Then she asked Mercer the question that mattered, whether the operation had been compromised. Mercer said the confrontation had disrupted surveillance and created unnecessary exposure around an active federal assignment. He didn't overstate it. He didn't need to. The damage was obvious. Kessler tried to defend himself again. He said he was investigating suspicious men and couldn't accept badges at face value. That argument died on contact with the facts. He had been offered verification. More than once. He refused it. That was on camera. Once that existed, good faith got weak fast. Hale moved to immediate damage control. She ordered Kessler to surrender his duty weapon to a senior officer on scene, pending administrative action. That was the moment he finally understood how serious it was. He hesitated, asked if she was serious. She repeated the order. He complied. Then she placed him on immediate administrative leave and removed him from the scene. That decision did two things at once. It de-escalated the local federal clash, and it created instant distance between the department and Kessler's conduct. Hale knew she needed that separation on record right away. Mercer and Ruiz stayed focused. No speeches, no attitude. They answered what needed answering and documented the interference. Hale asked what the marshals needed to reduce further damage. Mercer gave limited instructions, but the original surveillance position was already burned. That contrast finished Kessler. He had spent the entire encounter acting like jurisdiction was personal. Hale resolved the same situation in minutes by doing basic police work. Verify, assess, correct, contain. He was escorted out of the diner by another officer. By then, the record against him was already strong. His body cam showed the credentials. Radio traffic showed how he framed the marshals. Civilian video captured the public escalation. Hale had verified the IDs herself. Backup officers saw the correction happen live. That kind of timeline leaves very little room to hide. By the time he got back to the station, this wasn't just a bad scene in a diner. It was an internal affairs problem, a command staff problem, and a federal relationship problem. Once those three hit at the same time, careers usually don't recover. When Sergeant Monica Hale entered the diner, the scene was already bad for Kessler. He had two plainclothes marshals still seated, backup arriving on a false frame, civilians watching, and Bodycam recording everything. He had already ignored credentials and refused verification. That was the real problem, not the first approach, the refusal to correct it. Hale saw it fast. Kessler started talking first. He said the two men were suspicious, non-compliant, and possibly impersonating law enforcement. Hale let him get enough out to understand his position, then shifted to Mercer and Ruiz. They identified themselves again. Same calm, same facts. Federal law enforcement. Active official business. Verification available immediately. Hale asked for credentials. Mercer handed them over. Ruiz did the same. Hale checked them and asked a few direct questions tied to assignment and chain. Both answered cleanly. No hesitation, no inconsistency. That ended the issue right there. The credentials were real. The officers were real. Kessler had been wrong. The smart move for him then would have been silence. He didn't take it. He kept arguing. He kept trying to justify the stop and the removal order. That made it worse. A mistaken approach can sometimes be explained. Refusing to back off after confirmation is much harder to defend. Hale shut that down immediately. She told him to step back. Then she told him to stop talking. That was the shift. A few minutes earlier, Kessler had been giving orders to everyone in the diner. Now his own supervisor was controlling him in front of backup, witnesses, and the marshals he had tried to throw out. Hale returned the credentials and gave a brief apology. Then she asked Mercer the question that mattered, whether the operation had been compromised. Mercer said the confrontation had disrupted surveillance and created unnecessary exposure around an active federal assignment. He didn't overstate it. He didn't need to. The damage was obvious. Kessler tried to defend himself again. He said he was investigating suspicious men and couldn't accept badges at face value. That argument died on contact with the facts. He had been offered verification more than once. He refused it. That was on camera. Once that existed, good faith got weak fast. Hale moved to immediate damage control. She ordered Kessler to surrender his duty weapon to a senior officer on scene pending administrative action. That was the moment he finally understood how serious it was. He hesitated, asked if she was serious. She repeated the order. He complied. Then she placed him on immediate administrative leave and removed him from the scene. That decision did two things at once. It de-escalated the local federal clash, and it created instant distance between the department and Kessler's conduct. Hale knew she needed that separation on record right away. Mercer and Ruiz stayed focused. No speeches, no attitude. They answered what needed answering and documented the interference. Hale asked what the marshals needed to reduce further damage. Mercer gave limited instructions, but the original surveillance position was already burned. That contrast finished Kessler. He had spent the entire encounter acting like jurisdiction was personal. Hale resolved the same situation in minutes by doing basic police work. Verify, assess, correct, contain. He was escorted out of the diner by another officer. By then, the record against him was already strong. His body cam showed the credentials. Radio traffic showed how he framed the marshals. Civilian video captured the public escalation. Hale had verified the IDs herself. Backup officers saw the correction happen live. That kind of timeline leaves very little room to hide. By the time he got back to the station, this wasn't just a bad scene in a diner. It was an internal affairs problem, a command staff problem, and a federal relationship problem. Once those three hit it